Listening for the Hammond Mill. The whistle went off at, I believe, 7:30, and then 8 o'clock. So your life was governed by that Hammond whistle. And school, 9 o'clock, get home from school and promptly go out and play constantly. And my buddy Dale and I spent an awful lot of time down on the Catesy Slough, or we'd ride our bikes down to Powell's Pond and go fishing. And as soon as that 5 o'clock whistle blew, back on your bike and you rode home again, and supper. And yes, my dad was a foreman at the Hammond Mill, retired there. When he came home in late 45, ended up working at the mill and worked his way up to the senior planing mill foreman. I spent 6 months of my life there when I got out of high school, hated every minute of it, and left as quickly as I could.
One of my brothers worked there for a short period of time, but my dad worked out of town in logging camps. So when the boys got old enough to work, they went up there with them. But my brother next to me in age worked there as soon as he was out of high school, because he wanted to earn enough money to go into whatever he was going into.
I worked there as a young man piling blocks in the shingle mill. My mother piled blocks and packed shingles, pardon me, in the shingle mill, and my stepdad was a shingle sawyer, top-notch shingle sawyer. Some of it is happy memories, but some of it was like, compared to the modern mill they have there now, it was like working in some kind of a dungeon or something. It was really archaic or primitive, I guess you would say.
I worked there just as a part-time, nothing length, nothing really important. I was a cleanup guy. My dad spent most of his life at the Hammond Mill. Prior to that, he worked at the old Hammond cash store, but he spent a lot of years and retired from the BC Forest. My brother also spent all his young life there, and he retired from the BC Forest Products a few years back. Well, it was, the only thing I really can remember is walking down the railroad tracks, where we lived right beside in Hammond, walking down at 4:30, waiting for him to meet my dad when he's coming home from work. And he'd be walking down the tracks, and we'd come home, and Mom would have dinner ready. In those days, only one person in the family worked, and that was quite unique, which today it's not that way. But it was kind of nice to come home, and we'd just be together and enjoy probably going to a baseball game that night. He was what they call a green reman foreman, which was where they cut the cedar logs into planks, and he was the foreman of that for quite some time.
He worked at several mills, but he left Hammond Mill and then came back, and then he was superintendent for a long time. Yeah. It was interesting to see the logs coming up, but also interesting to see them cutting the wood with their saws, and so many people lost their fingers. Yeah, quite a few.
Well, it's interesting because I never went on a tour of the mill until I was an adult. And I saw, like, he was a head sawyer, so I was told that he made some innovations at the mill and like improved on the sawing and that. And he was there for over 30 years, you know, but he lost his hearing, you know, being at the mill. And like, it was just a place he went, and like I said, I never saw what it was like inside until I was an adult, and really appreciated what he did, you know, all those years. And it must have been so noisy in that building. And
the busiest time that we saw a lot of cars was when the boys were going to work in the morning, because they came from Port Coquitlam and they came from Mission to work at the mill, because I think there was, on the two shifts in 1947, the year I joined the BC Forest Products, I think there was just about 700 people work at the Hammond Mill on two shifts. They had very busy. It was, of course, it was kind of the prime time for the building of all the vet houses and all, you know. So it was a big market in those days. Yes, 1946, 47, 48, 49, went through the 48 flood that we really had a tough time with the flood. Well, we didn't lose much, but the mill had to shut down. We were down for, I guess, for a couple of weeks, because it got pretty high there. BC Forest Product took over, I believe, in 1947. That's the year that they hired me as a 16-year-old kid to go to work. And I got 67 cents an hour. It was big money. I They taught me how to tie lumber. And of course, at later years with Jack Watts, when we went day shift, they were kind enough to take us and give us grading lessons, and we had that every year. We could 67 cents an hour, and then it got to 99. Nickel, then it was 6 cents an hour more in night shift. So everybody didn't like night shift, but they took it for an extra 48 cents a day. And our old gang saws, we had Ralph Fawcett and I were sitting outside of I'm going to say Jack Shields' place. I think Jack had the store then. We were sitting there in front of there having our, whatever it was, a cigarette we were having, and this man with car was beautiful Buick, was from California. At 1 o'clock, they started up and down, and they shook the whole bloody town. And his car started to bounce like, he thought it was an earthquake. Out of his car, he ran and he said, "You're having an earthquake." I said, "Don't worry about it. It's the gang saws down in Hammond."
He came about 1918, I think, and the owner of the mill, Don Hartnell, he was the owner of the mill, and Don and he became very good friends. He would come up to our house and visit and talk things over with him. My dad was the head electrician there, and he put in a lot of new machinery and things like that. They kept upgrading the mill all the time. And I know he would go down there on Sunday morning to make sure everything was okay for startup on Monday. And he also started looking after the fire, because there wasn't any. And they did have, from time to time, I can remember the whistle going and my dad rushing off down to the mill because there was a fire. And of course everything was wooden timbers and everything there. Everything was, yeah. And once in a while, only a few times, I went into the mill when we had visitors from out of town, and my dad was showing them the place. And so then that time I would be able to go into his office and look over the Fraser River. Like, he had a window that you could look over the Fraser. It was really quite interesting, and see the booms and everything. But we always got out of bed by the whistles and got ready for school and stuff. And at 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock we children went by those whistles. Yeah, we really did, because then we really knew what time it was.
My dad worked at the Hammond Mill for, I can't remember how long. It was 6 months or something like that. And where he was working, it was just dust, and he almost died of cedar poisoning. And so he had, he was in the hospital for a while, got over it, and that's when Jake Gerbrandt sold him a truck, and Middleton Trucking started.
I think I was kind of blackballed, or kind of my dad unionized. I think the guy that was the personnel manager for years, Norm Flowerdew, and my dad had some set to. So I could never get a job shoveling snow, doing all the stuff the other kids do, cleanup on the weekends. No. Ended up quitting school when I was about 17. Started working on the tugs in the river. And I worked for a little tugboat outfit down here at the bottom of the hill. And the guys on the tug out of the mill in Hammond were, the engineer was an old family friend of my parents, and the Dixons. Doug Dixon, he was a mailman here for years. And they lived right down on that Maple Crescent. And the old guy that was the captain of the tug was actually from Port Moody, Captain Myers. His father was an early pilot, brought the sail ships, the guy of the sailing ships into Westminster. Him and his brother both became captains early days. So he was the captain of this old tug in Hammond, the Cedar Prince. And this little tug in Haney, we used to help them a lot. So the old man, old Mike Myers, hey kid, he got me aside one day and he says, you consider coming and work here? I said, oh yeah, the big tug, the Cedar Prince, that was our childhood dream, would work on that tug. You know, and so, yeah, well go down and put your name in. He says, and, so I go down, I tell Flowerdew, Mike Myers and Doug Dixon said, come and see you and fill out an application. No, we're not taking, we take people out of the mill. Oh, okay. Well, a week later or something, we're assisting him again. Hey, did you put your name in there, kid? Yeah, well, Flowerdew wouldn't take it. He says, they hire guys out of the mill, so. Okay, I'll tend to look after that, old Mike says. So Mike went to the office and told, like, my mom gets a phone call and I was out in the tug or something. Mr. Flowerdew called. She was all bewildered and wants you to come down to the office when you get in. Oh, okay, so I go down there and here's the application. Go over to lunch, we'll fill it out. And next day, can you start next Monday? I said, no, I better give Mr. Beckstrom 2 weeks' notice. So 2 weeks later, I started there, worked with old Doug Dixon and Mike Myers there for about another year or so before I went on to other greener pastures. But it was just a fun experience.